Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads, and what a weird Weekly Reads it has been. Now let's get started because this is going to go a bit long, I fear. So, I have 3 bills to tell you about, and they come at the first 3 books I tried this week. So the first book I tried this reading week was These Violent Delights by Micah, Nemerever. This is the story of Paul and Julian, 2 college freshmen who fall in together, become codependent, best friends, fall in lust and love, and proceed to thrill kill. I've described this book several times as an updated version of Leopold and Loeb, and it is updated from the 20s to the early 70s. The book's also been compared to The Secret History by Donna Tartt and Call Me By Your Name by Andrei Ochman, although how exactly it's anything like Call Me By Your Name, I have absolutely no idea. The Secret History, oh yes, I can see the influence there, but Call Me By Your Name, heck no. Except for maybe that it is incredibly boring and overwritten. But anyway, so I did not get on with this book at all, largely because the writing was a slog. It just meandered, and of course it's a problem that is always present when you write genre fiction with literary ambitions. Is that while literary ambitions can lead to typically better writing and better characterization, it can also detract from the plot. And it can lead to a much slower, a much more plotting story, which is in a way what happens here. Also, in that the extended character development, I don't think quite works, because in a way, when you have this kind of dark academia story where the narrator falls in with this weird, sexy, charismatic, seductive, sociopathic, elite individual or group, you kind of have to really show what is it about this group or this individual that is that list. And I don't think Nemerever really ever explains what's so sexy and charismatic and seductive about Julian. And conversely, what is it about Paul that attracts Julian's notice to where they have the story that they have. So I was bored, honestly. So the next spell, coming on the heels of These Violent Delights, is Gay Bar, Why We Went Out by Jeremy Atherton Lin. This is a mix memoir and social history focusing on the gay bar. Both personally for Jeremy Atherton Lin, as well as socially for gay men in general. And I had this... I mean, it opens with a very affecting scene. But I think the problem is that while the memoir aspects of this book is really good, the social history aspects is a bit not terribly good. And I think maybe had the focus been just on Jeremy Atherton Lin's encounters with the gay bar or with the gay bar scene or whatever, I think might have been a much better book. But yeah, but as it stands, yeah, it's just a bit of a mess. So I bailed on that. And then the third book I bailed on is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is the start of an epic fantasy series in which Touraine was conscripted as a toddler into the you catch because I'm blanking on the kingdoms. Okay, Baladarian army, who has been sent back with her outfit to suppress a revolt in her homeland. Accompanying the expeditionary force is Princess Luca, who is trying to find a solution to this revolt in order to cement her claim to the throne. Even though she's the queen, her father was, or mother, was the reigning monarch, and therefore she's by rights the queen, but her uncle is, I guess, either usurped the crown or decided when his regency he just became king or something. I mean, generally it's probably because Luca should be the main antagonist. But, yeah, for the story to be told the way C.L. Clarke wants it to be told, there's got to be an usurping uncle here to be the main villain. And it just... I didn't care for this book. I didn't like the writing, the opening scenes, just I didn't quite care for, so yeah, I bailed. So by midday Sunday, I was in despair. I'm like, yeah, and we'll get to a bit of an autopsy about these three books as well as what happened last week. But then I'm like, okay, I need to read something else. This isn't working. So I decided to read a book I hauled last month. Sunny Days. The Children's Television Revolution That Changed America by David Kamp. And Sunny Days indeed. This book is awesome. It's a history of the children's, the educational programming for children that started in the 60s with PBS, starting with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and then quickly followed by Sesame Street, The Electric Company, Zoom, The Magic Garden, Newsy Review, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, Schoolhouse Rock, and I'm constantly blanking on this one group. Free to Be You and Me. How sort of all of these programs sort of changed the face of American childhood and education, and primarily focusing on Sesame Street and the Children's Television Workshop, now the Sesame Workshop. So this book is amazing. It's just wonderful. It gives a general lay of the land of what children's television was like in the 50s and early 60s. What drove not only Fred Rogers in his drive to create quality children's programming, or quality educational children's programming, but also Jane Cooney and Lloyd Morrissett's drive to do the same thing with what would eventually become Sesame Street. And then with the success of Sesame Street, the plethora of other children educational programs in the 70s. And I loved every minute with this book. It was just amazing. It's such a really wonderful history, of very positive, in that you don't really see a whole lot of lately. So yeah, quite enjoyed it. I would say maybe the only downer is the final chapter, Sunshot, in which basically the last 45-ish years is kind of covered relatively quickly. And discussing how a lot of the shows that followed, Sesame Street, The Magic Garden, New Zoo Review, kind of went out of fashion and eventually were canceled in the either later 70s or into the 80s, with the conservative backlash to the liberal progressive sort of consensus that reigned during the mid-century, but also how the Reagan administration, during their stewardship of the FCC, really sort of wrecked any sort of possibility for quality children's educational programming. And essentially you have, in the 80s, a lot of cartoons that, great though they were, I mean, I love G.I. Joe and I love He-Man and She-Ra and a lot of the rest. They were also glorified toy commercials. So, to a certain extent, if you're particularly concerned with educational programming for children, the 80s were a wasteland, excepting for what you had on PBS. I mean, that's changed, I think, into the 90s, and certainly later 90s and 2000s, when Nick Jr. and Disney Jr. had some good programming along with PBS, although, I mean, it's not exactly the same. And even with, like, say, Sesame Street, it resting on its laurels, that it hasn't been as experimental, as focused as it was in the early 70s. And of course the whole deal with HBO, to where I'm not even entirely sure Sesame Street is on PBS anymore. Or at least certainly I think you have to have HBO Max to stream Sesame Street, which is a shame. But anyway, so I really love this book, and I really want to read, I think, more on television and the history of television, the history of children's television, and definitely the history of PBS. I really want a history of PBS. So I love that book. So Sunny Days was by far the highlight of my reading week. And things kind of declined from there. I read Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon Lee. This is a standalone fantasy in which Jebi, an artist who seeks a position with the Ministry of Art or Artistry under the Razan occupational government, is sort of denied this position and instead takes up a position with the Ministry of Armor, in which they are assigned to paint the control sigils for the Razan army's automata, including War Dragon, which forms the fulcrum of the book. I did not get on with this book, unfortunately. And that's frustrating and a shame because I do love Yoon Lee's Extricate novels. They are an awesome trilogy. But this book, it just... Jebi... I didn't quite connect with Jebi as a character. I thought they weren't... I don't know, it just... I thought their story really didn't quite work. And also, they're kind of the fulcrum of the story. This discovery that they eventually exploit. I don't quite buy it because Jebi's only had a limited amount of time to study this art form. They're not trained in this art form. They are, the new hire. And so them noticing something off, something strange about some of these control sigils stretches the imagination. And the ending is rather... I don't know quite what to make of that ending. So, anyway. And finally, the last book I read this reading week was Gay Life and Culture of World History, edited by Robert Aldrich. This is an anthology of gay history, starting with Greece and Rome and proceeding through the European Middle Ages and into the modern period, as well as token gestures to homosexualities or queer identities outside of Western culture. And I do mean token, it is like... And in a way, this book is useful as a reference, as a general overview, but as a pleasurable reading experience, it's not great. The writing is mostly dry, lacking detail, and it really makes, although I guess in a way it does make you want to read more about the histories in depth than maybe what's given here. Although that said, the art is quite nice. This book is replete with numerous images, and those are quite interesting and neat. So anyway, so that was my rather disappointing reading week, and does, I think, call for a bit of an autopsy. So, regarding general fiction, of which These Violent Delights is the most recent example of me not really getting on with general fiction, even though you can maybe you could consider this more of a thriller with literary ambitions, but I'm gonna go with general fiction. Yeah, I really need to take a long break, if not just a complete purge of this shelf, these bookcases here, or bookshelves here, which is where I keep most of my general fiction. There's some here too, that's mostly genre or books that I really don't have much of a spot for. But anyway, because I'm not really getting on with them, and it's not terribly fun for me to read a book and just bail on it. So I really need to take a break from general fiction from now, or for now. Also, given the fact that I'm frustrated, well, moving on from general fiction to themed TBRs, I am beyond frustrated with how my Pride TBR is going. I've so far I haven't liked any of the books I've read for my Pride TBR, and it's frustrating. And also remembering back that, except for a few instances, I had somewhat similar reaction to my TBR from May 2. So I don't know if this is necessarily, in a way, I just unfortunately did not luck out with my selections, that maybe next year, or maybe I just really need to play my TBR or my list of possibles by ear, rather than just, okay, these are the books I'm going to read, and that's that. So anyway, I need to figure this out so I can better plan for coming years, or just pick better books, or again just completely abandon the idea of TBR and just read whatever the heck I want whenever the heck I want to read it. Even though I do enjoy participating in the readathons and the reading challenges and that sort of thing. So I don't know. And I've got two coming up. One that I'll talk a bit about, well, both of them later. So anyway. So of immediate concern is what am I going to read next week, this coming reading week, because I have about 5 or 6 books from my Pride TBR left. Yeah, and then so I don't know if I should just go ahead and abandon my Pride TBR, or just keep going in the hopes that I will make a breakthrough with one of them, or if I should just abandon it and just read something else. So anyway, so the possibilities for this coming reading week are, if I decide to stick with my Pride TBR, I will read Docile by Szapara, which is a near future dystopia in which debt slavery is a thing, and the main character, Alicia, is sort of turned into a sex slave. Which I know I'm probably not going to get on with this book. So I'm definitely leery about having a go at this, even though I really should give it a go. But and then a Desolation called Peace by Arkady Martine. This is a sequel to A Memory Called Empire, and this Desolation Called Peace is a sort of the continuation in which the Teixkalan Empire confronts this mysterious force that they cannot communicate with. And in order to try to communicate with these aliens, Mahit Zamer and Three Seagrass, the protagonist and deuteragonist from A Memory Called Empire, are called in to try to communicate. So, now, if I do decide to abandon my Pride TBR, a memory. I am so sorry. A Desolation Called Peace. I could read for Space Opera September in September, which is one of the things I'm going to be involved with in the fall. And then if I do decide to abandon my Pride TBR, I will probably read The Crown and Crisis, Countdown to the Abdication by Alexander Larman. This is about the lead up to the abdication of Edward VIII. And A World Beneath the Sands, The Golden Age of Egyptology by Toby Wilkerson, which is obviously the history of Egyptology in the early 20th century. So anyway, booktube. That's what I've read and the possibilities of what I might be reading this coming reading week. There is one bit of positive news. I did watch the first episode of Loki on Wednesday, and I won't be having videos for the next few weeks on Wednesdays because I will be taking the time I usually film videos to watch Loki's new episodes of Loki. I quite enjoyed it. It was really good and really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the series goes from here, and I'll report back the further in I am. And I think that's about it, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. I'll probably have a tag video, a poetry reading video, because there's this new poetry reading challenge that's, I think, trying to turn BookTube into pro wrestling, which I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. And then, of course, on next Friday, there will be weekly reads. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great weekend, and stay safe.